I hate this. Excuse me? Okay. So, today it's my honor, um, to represent the host of the Big Biz Brew and the host of Sully's Biz Brew and the CEO of the Compass Point Group. Without further ado, Robert Sully Sullivan.
Good morning. Wow. You guys are up early. Would I mess this up if I close this? Yeah. Is that right? All right. Well, I actually got to interview someone from this school on the air a number of times, and I can't remember who it was. It was when you first started, and what was interesting about that, pardon me, what was interesting about that entire thing was I got more email from media and parents asking about your school the minute they found out that there was a school for entrepreneurship in San Diego. So it's exciting to be here, and I'm glad I got a chance to do so. I'm just going to tell you from the very start that success is an art; it's not a science. And you know, I own two of you. I got a 23-year-old and a 21-year-old, both college-age girls, and I understand your animal very clearly. And I also understand the new paradigm shift in education, where you sort of have your future planned out, and it's going to be like this and like this and like this. And albeit I think a good plan is great, you also have to understand what happens when you can't execute that plan because stuff comes up. And I want you to remember one thing, and my good friend, I think they call you Mrs. Lowe or Miss Lowe here, said, I said something to her yesterday. I told her the one thing I do know is what I don't know. And she says, didn't Socrates say that? I said, no, I wrote it in the first book I put together. And it's true. I want you to, you need to own that, because you're not going to know everything. And we're going to come around to this in a minute, because as I look back at you know how I got here, as great as my life is, and I've had a lot of successes, man, I missed a lot of stuff just because I thought I knew everything, and I was too embarrassed to say that I didn't. And as I tell my daughters, embarrassment could not hold a light up to regret. I look back at some of the things that I didn't do because I was too scared or too embarrassed to do them, and they're significant. So that's what I call an opportunity cost. So let's work this backwards. Currently, I am a partner in what's called a hedge fund. It's a venture capital fund, and we invest in technology projects. And when you hear about venture capital, that's what I do. And I do that until about 11 o'clock every morning. At 12 o'clock every day, I go shoot a national television show that's in about 65 million TV homes called Biz Brew. And we shoot that through a television studio that I own. So now I've got two lives. I've got a life as an investment banker, and I've got a life as a TV host, but I also have a life as an entrepreneur owning a television studio. After that, I go on to ESPN Radio, and I do the Big Biz Show, which is also in about 70 million TV homes and 150 radio stations. And when that's all over, I take a deep breath and I figure out what I'm going to do the next day. How did I get there? It's pretty interesting. I'm going to tell you a lesson here that, and simply stated, an opportunity cost is the cost of a missed opportunity because of something or a decision you didn't make. I made a ton of decisions to get me here. Not all of them great, but I think the best one was the fact that I just took a shot. So how many times have you asked yourself, man, I wish I'd done that? If you were at a party or a game, or you know, I don't want to go to that thing, and you end up, all your friends come back and say it was a fantastic time, and then you have to ask yourself, how many times have you said, man, I'm glad I did that? Well, when I look back to my first radio interview, I was running an investment bank, and some guy called me up and said, I want you to come in, I want you to talk about venture capital. And man, the last thing I wanted to do is take time out of my day to go into a radio studio. And this was literally 22 years ago. By so doing, I walked in, and I did this 10-minute radio interview, and I walked out and I go, man, that was great. Not only did I love it, I called those guys up and said, hey, listen, I'm available every Tuesday at 7 a.m. if you want me. Suddenly, they had me back the next Tuesday. Within 6 months, keep in mind, this is something I didn't want to do, right? This is something I decided I'm not going in there. I looked for every reason not to go in. 6 months later, I had an afternoon drive talk show at a local radio station called KSDO 20 years ago. Call it luck. Call it being at the right place at the right time. What I can call it, it would have been an opportunity cost not to take that interview. Imagine if I hadn't have taken that interview. I wouldn't be standing in front of you today had I not just stepped out and taken that interview. Opportunity like that, as well as lost opportunity, can either take you to the road of success or it can take you down the road of regret. I can tell you where I'm sitting now, I wouldn't be able to have the impact I have on young folks talking about entrepreneurship, talking about financial literacy. I mean, a number of things we've been able to do on the radio over the last 20 years had I not just taken that step. And I'm telling you right now, I pulled in that parking lot for that first interview, and I pulled out of the parking lot and drove away, stopped at a stop sign, came back, and went in. I was this close to not having this life because of that. The regret's what I want you to avoid. Embarrassment, the fear of rejection, the fear itself is going to lead to regret every time. And you know why? Because we lament our losses 3 times more than we celebrate our gains. Anybody here, any of the people here, well, I shouldn't say Charger fan anymore because there's no Chargers anymore. You guys Padre fans? You guys sports fans, right? Every time your team wins, you feel great the next day. But if they lose, you're still bumming about it on Thursday. And that's what I mean. And I want you to think about that. You get an A in something, you're great. I'm going to the next level. You get a D in something, and I doubt any kid in this room's ever gotten a D, but if you ever fail at something, it kind of keeps you up at night, right? That's sort of what regret does. And this radio sort of story of mine that led to a career in radio, ended up leading to a career in television, ended up bringing investors into a deal to where I was able to start a venture capital fund. This all goes back to one thing, right? Are you following my story here? It goes back to the time where I didn't say no, right? You guys know the movie Hunger Games? You know the movie, was it Jennifer Lawrence? Was she the lead actor in Hunger Games? She didn't think she was up for the role. She turned down the first audition. Could you imagine her life? Would you even know who she was? Have you ever heard of the Beatles? I know a couple of us here. Have you ever heard of the Rolling Stones? Probably the most famous band in history. Let's go back to the Beatles. You know the Beatles, Ringo wasn't the original drummer. A guy named Pete Best was the original drummer of the Beatles. He decided this wasn't for him, and he walked away. Could you imagine? I mean, honestly. Steve Jobs. Who knows who Steve Jobs is? What did Steve Jobs do? He's the one who made your iPhone. Do you realize, by the way, do you realize the word iPhone wasn't in our lexicon 11 years ago? Do you realize iPad, we didn't even have the word called iPad 6 years ago? Steve Jobs, he was a software engineer. He went to this guy named Randy Adams for some initial startup money, and Randy Adams turned him down saying that personal computers will never fly. People don't want their own computers, is what he said. Now, that was a multi-billion-dollar opportunity cost, wasn't it? Could you imagine? Now, I'm not here to tell you, by any stretch of the imagination, that you just say yes to everything, because there's just some stupid stuff. In the world of investment community, I've probably looked at 1,000 deals of guys that are going to change the world, and maybe 2% of them are worthy. So you need to understand how to maybe go through your own checklist internally to find out what's going to make you make that right decision. But I can tell you, do not let embarrassment or fear of rejection be one of those reasons not to step out. I think the lesson here is that you have to learn to recognize opportunity, and you guys are in a perfect spot, and you've got the perfect mentors here to do that. When you think you see the slightest sliver of opportunity, don't just say, okay, I'll try this. I want you to start thinking about being drawn to it. Draw yourself to opportunity. I mean, you've heard your parents and you've heard your teachers say that 90% of life is just showing up. Imagine if I didn't show up to that first radio interview. Honestly. I mean, as a result of that, I'm literally in 125 million TV homes every day. I literally am in 150 radio stations. I'm an American Forces Radio Network in 175 countries. Not because I'm great, because I turned the car around and went back in the parking lot, right? And I guess just some metrics before I wrap up here this morning is that when you show up, I want you to look ready, because perception's reality, okay? You don't have time in this world today not to act. Do you understand what I'm saying? You don't have time not to act. The opportunity window sometimes closes as fast as it opens, okay? Had I not made the decision to ask Ms. Lowe a question the other day, I wouldn't be standing in front of you here. I wouldn't get a chance to hang with you guys. It's all about opportunity. And again, I'm not saying jump off the cliff with your eyes closed. I'm just saying start to be drawn towards opportunity. And speaking of showing up and looking ready, perception is reality. If you say, hey, I got this, they see she got this. You understand what I'm saying? It really comes down to that. Now, I will tell you that perseverance and passion without talent is nothing more than American Idol audition, because some of those people think they should be stars, and some of those people have no business singing. So passion is not enough. But a lot of this is perception and optics, because no one knows what's under the hood until you get in. And if you're not there, you can't get it. I think if you think about being successful in life, either financially or personally, athletically for some of you, it's all about one thing. And I got to interview a guy named Steve Forbes about 10 years ago. Steve Forbes ran for president in this country. He was born to a very wealthy family. He runs a company called the Forbes Media Group, among other things. You've probably seen Forbes magazine or maybe heard of it. He said something really simple, because one day I talked to him on the air. I said, look, we're talking, we've got hundreds of thousands of people watching you on television here, Steve. If you could give me one sentence to ensure the success of a business, what would it be? And what he said was, it's pretty simple. Find a need and fill it. That's it. That's all the success is finding a need and filling it. Well, if you think in terms of, look, I'm just going to find a need and I'm going to solve that problem, okay? For example, guy who invented the shoelaces. The guy who invented the tip on your shoelace. He found a need and he filled it. When you start thinking in terms of that, you start looking for opportunity, all right? Because now you're going to walk around school going, okay, what needs to be fixed? What hasn't been thought of yet? Oh, wait, there's a thing. We need a thing to shake the salt. Hey, I think I'm going to invent the salt shaker, right? Honestly, it comes down to what Steve Forbes says. Find a need and fill it, and be looking for that opportunity. I want you to remember something. My daughter, McKenna, who graduated art school, and I was mortified when she went to art school, because I thought, man, she's the smartest kid on the planet, and now she's going to be on my payroll till she's 45 because she's going to go study art. What I didn't realize at the time was, you know what our biggest export is in this country? Entertainment. Entertainment is the biggest export in this country. So think about entertainment. Movies, music, film, video games. What one component is in all of those things? Art. You know what major has the lowest unemployment rate in this country? Art majors. Followed by engineering majors. And I know there's an argument between the engineering guys, because it goes like this. Long story short, McKenna wanted to work at Pixar. So I said, okay, McKenna, what are you going to do? She goes, well, I think I'll just write a letter because I don't want to bother the guy. Okay, embarrassment, regret, fear of rejection, right? So I said, I want you to think in terms of something. When I go to the mailbox, what's the first thing I do when I get the mail? She goes, well, you put it on the counter there. I said, when I get a FedEx package in the front door, what's the first thing I do? She goes, I open it. So what do you think? So, and that's all I said. So what do you think she did? She went and wrote a letter, and she put it in a FedEx envelope. And God bless her, she took out $13 and went down to FedEx and paid the $13 for an overnight letter, signature required, to go to the CEO of Pixar. And what that letter said was, my name is McKenna Sullivan. I am a senior at Canyon Crest Academy, which is a public school in Carmel Valley. I so badly want to work at Pixar. I've just been accepted to art school, and I will empty the trashes for you if I'm allowed to do that. Well, lo and behold, nothing happened. And then suddenly something happened. About 3 months later, we get a FedEx envelope back from the CEO of Pixar inviting McKenna for a tour. Now, McKenna doesn't work at Pixar, but because of that, McKenna now has a letter of recommendation from the CEO of Pixar as she's walking into art school. And she used that letter of recommendation now after she graduated art school, and she's gainfully employed, and she's now been recruited to go up to Portland and work for Nike as a pattern designer with that same letter in hand. And this is all, and remember the story, going back to the very beginning that I talked to you about. The one thing I do know is what? It's what I don't know, right? Embrace that and forget the regret, forget the embarrassment, forget the fear of rejection, and just take that step forward and recognize opportunity. And then create that perception where people think, hey, he's got it. Even though you may not know what the heck you're doing, if you look like you do, they're going to think you do. McKenna did that. She took a FedEx letter, sent it to the CEO of Pixar. She got in. I'm going to leave you with the 4 P's of success for me. And the first one is persevere. And persevere sometimes means persevering past your own head, right? Because your thoughts will cause you paralysis by analysis sometimes, and I would try to avoid that. So persevere is number 1. Pursue is number 2. Progress by failing fast. You're all going to fail. If you're going to fail, Zig Ziglar says, fail fast. And then course correct. And last of all, you'll prevail. Thanks so much for having me today. It was great. It was great to be in front of you. I'm sorry? Yes, I have plenty of time. I don't have to. I'm all yours for the next hour or so. All right. Any questions? Okay, that's it. Go ahead. Same thing you're talking about. So when you so let me and I get this question every day, literally every day, and it's usually from an adult. But if I ask you, what are you talking about at lunchtime? It's typically what's going on around you, right? So right now, today, I'll talk about, of course, St. Patrick's Day. I'll talk about the economic impact of St. Patrick's Day. I'll talk about the fact that $5 billion today will be spent in this country on St. Patrick's Day. I'll talk about what's going on in Washington. I'll talk about what's going on in the economy. It's really what everybody's talking about. And it's easy to find, it's easy to figure that out. Same thing you're talking about. I say, it really, truly is. Same thing your parents are talking about, same thing your teachers are talking about. What do you mean? Which one? What did I do then? You mean what I do for a living? We had what was called an investment banking consulting firm where we took, interestingly enough, people who had ideas that wanted to get them financed. They came back in those days. We didn't have color printers, and we barely got into computers. They had these 300-page, what are called business plans, and we converted those business plans to what's called investment marketing memorandum. And I had working for me several writers and a couple of artists, and we became experts in teaching people how to get financing versus being the guys that actually invested in the deals. Anybody else? Yes?
So, to my knowledge, you've also been in a band.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I don't publish that. Yeah, I happen to be in a Grammy Award-winning band. Yes, that would be my third life. I went to school here in San Diego on a music scholarship, and this is probably a good lesson. I don't publicize this only because it stands sort of on its own. But I had a record deal out of college and went up and tried to chase that for a while and failed miserably and ended up working at an ad agency. It was my first foray into entrepreneurship because of that failure. That's another speech about, which we should probably do sometime, about how I found a piece of paper in front of the building and turned it into a newspaper, which lasted for 3 years. But I chased that down, and about 10 years ago, the guys that I was playing with back out of college all became very successful Grammy Award-winning musicians, asked me to come back, and that turned into a music career. So that would be the third life that I have. Life number 1 is investment banking, life number 2 is television, radio, and life number 3 is music. But I don't really publicize that very much. Way to bust me, though. Thanks. Sure, absolutely. Anybody else? Anybody here want to be in media? Yeah? What do you want to do? Yeah. I mean, I'm in a TV studio. Here's your shot.
Oh, yeah. Well, my main idea for me being in media is to kind of, tell these interesting stories through media.
So you want to be on camera?
Yeah. Yeah, I can do that.
Anybody ever thought about inventing something, an app, a technology?
Yeah, I've considered that.
You want to share your idea? No, see? That's what's called an NDA. That's a non-disclosure agreement. She doesn't want to share it, which is actually smart.
Well, you know how sometimes when you're in the parking lot and you got this car and you have no idea where it is? What if you have this app that, helps you find your car so you don't have to go around looking for it? You just oh, there's my car.
So what are you going to do to get that going?
Well, I can start developing it, testing it, working out the GPS stuff.
I bet there's probably 20 kids in here that have ideas like that. And this is a lesson here. Because now that I hear this idea, remember what I do for a living in my morning job is I invest in deals, right? So I want to hear about the rest of this. I bet there's 20 people in here that have ideas that haven't spoken up. And why haven't you spoken up? Regret, embarrassment, fear of rejection? Any lesson here? Because, what is your name?
Jackson?
So Jackson's going to get my business card when I walk out the door here today, and Jackson's going to email me, and I'm going to put it in front of my partners. All right? Lesson learned? That's what I'm talking about. That is exactly what, when you see an opportunity, the door opened and then it closed that fast, didn't it? And he took it. And I think you need to learn to recognize that stuff. You do. I mean, look, I'm not telling you got to be a huckster and you got to try to get something out of everybody. But if you got something in the back of your head and a guy's laying it out in a silver platter, I'll give you an example. I raise money for an organization called the Challenge Athletes Foundation. The Challenge Athletes Foundation is when you see a military man or woman or someone born with a birth defect, sight impaired, hearing impaired, they lost a leg. If you lose your leg in battle, the insurance company will give you a leg that you can walk around in. But have you seen the guys with the running blades and such? Well, those cost about $70,000 a piece. So Challenge Athletes Foundation raises money to give grants to those people with that have needs like that. It's all athletic equipment. Sometimes it's a tandem bike for a rider that has a sight impairment. He's got to have two people riding the bike. Maybe it's a paralyzed guy that wants to ski, and they make stuff like that. So every year, we ride down the coast from San Francisco to San Diego, and we ride 700 miles in 7 days, believe it or not. And Challenge Athletes Foundation is a fantastic organization, and it's something that I get involved in. But if you think in terms of opportunity there, one of the reasons I'm involved with CAF is as I'm riding down the coast with these guys, I'm riding next to Bill Walton. Anybody know who Bill Walton is? NBA basketball player? I now serve on the board of directors with Bill Walton on 3 organizations here because it's my opportunity. As I said, you don't have to try to get something out of everybody, but when you see an opportunity, you got to take it. And I think one of the issues here is everything I'm doing, I'm thinking in the back of my head, what am I trying to accomplish today? And if I meet a guy like this, this could be an opportunity, right? It may not. But if I walk out the door here and don't figure it out, what happens if I see him on Google sometime and he's the guy who invented the Car Finder app that I missed out investing in, correct? Anybody else? You know, it's interesting because I'm to the point now in my career where if you ask me to go on the air in 5 minutes, all I need really is a paragraph of a story, and I can probably do talk radio for 3 hours. But it wasn't always like that and the reason it's like that now is because I'm always prepping. Like, you know, for example, if I hear something, we all heard the story about the tax return the other day, right? The Donald Trump tax return from 2005, right? Well, my first reaction was, okay, what was his tax rate? And then my reaction was, okay, what was the last 15 presidents' tax rate? And which of those presidents? So all I did was, from one story I heard, I started doing research just because I was sitting there in the doctor's office scrolling down my phone. So the resources I use are what, again, from the first question, what people are talking about, and I just drill down. You know, most of it, for me, and I guess the lesson to be learned here is don't use the University of Google because it's not credible for news type stories. Figure out how to drill down better. I use Reuters, Bloomberg, Dow, news editors. There's oftentimes, I try to look, like, for example, if you're going to talk about gun control, who's the one organization that doesn't want, who's the one organization that wants gun control? It would be law enforcement, right? So that's where I get my data from. I get my data from the person who has the least agenda for the story. And that's why the University of Google, if you typed in gun control stats from a pro-gun lobby, you're going to get one set of gun control stats. If you type in gun control stats from people that don't want guns, it's a completely different set of data. So it's a great question because you can't just trust the University of Google, and you just take that one extra step. And for me, I go to the agenda-less source. The source who gives me, I usually go to the opposite side. If I can make my point, whatever that point may be, from the opposite side of the fence, I'm doing good.
So what is your stance on environmental policy and environmental cleanup?
Based on what?
Based on, say, you found out that there was a large amount of maybe nuclear waste
Mm-hmm.
in a bag somewhere. And, you know, it'll have extremely negative implications upon the environment and the ecosystem of that environment.
Mm-hmm.
If you know someone went up to you and asked you for funding or maybe some sort of publicity, would you be willing to do that?
Well, it depends. I mean, yeah, if it's a story, yeah. I mean, when you're talking about two metrics here, one metric is news and information. The other metric is opportunity and investing. So it's two sort of different mindsets, and I'll take them one at a time. As if someone came out to me and said, there is a noxious leak in a gully somewhere and it's causing severe harm, my first reaction would be to vet that story, find out if there was an agenda from the person telling me that story. And once I did diligence on you and found out you had no axe to grind, then we would drill deeper and find out, okay, what's really going on here? And if it's so bad, how could it even exist in this country of overregulation? And what I mean by overregulation, I mean it's pretty tough to get away with anything these days. Once I found out that it was egregious, yeah, I put it on the air immediately, and I would get the right people involved. As far as investment capacity, I think my first, sort of thought would be, are we finding a need and are we filling it? How are we going to fill it? Is the technology proprietary? How are we going to fix it? Who's going to run it? Because I just want to put the money in. I want to run it. And if I don't have somebody who's run a company that takes noxious stuff out of a gully, then I'm probably out. But on the news side, I'm probably in as long as it's credible. You have a toxic deal for me? Pretty simple. Whatever's newest. Whatever's breaking. Honestly. You talking about on the air? Yeah, whatever's breaking. I mean, it honestly goes like this. President Trump gets inaugurated on Tuesday. I wake up to go on the air Wednesday, and there's a school shooting. I'm talking about the school shooting. honestly. I mean, I'm not going to ignore the other stuff, but when you talk about what order it goes in, it's the latest stuff. If there's a story about, well, boy, I don't know. Are you guys old enough to remember Bob Filner, the mayor? So I started this thing on Kogo Radio called the Recall Filner campaign, and it was an ongoing narrative. And I named him the emperor, and as the father of two daughters, I'll be very clear. I was not happy with this guy, and I wasn't happy with this guy long before we started the recall effort. So I invited him into my studio, and I said, and when you're talking to 50,000 people on the radio, and when you tune me on this afternoon on AM 1700 at 2 o'clock, a lot of people are listening to me, and I know the city's listening to me because I get emails from the guys in the city saying right on, and so on and so forth. Well, I said very openly, Mr. Filner or Mayor Filner, if you come in this studio, I'll give you an hour and I'll shut up. And then, but I get an hour and I get to ask anything I want after that. And he was going to come in the studio on the Thursday, and then we started the Recall Filner campaign, and it never happened. But the point is, I stayed on that story, this whole Recall Filner disaster that lasted for 18 months. Every day it was the same thing, but it was the latest every day. And then if an ancillary story came in, like an election or like a business story. That's how it takes hierarchy. We have things in the news business called slow news days when there just doesn't seem to be anything happening, and those are good days. I mean, it's there's as long as life kind of moves on, we always have something to talk about. What we try to avoid is when you turn on the news next time, or you turn on the radio, or you're on the way to school. If we're talking about traffic accidents, and we're talking about trees falling down, it's a slow news day. And you'll hear it happen every time. You'll hear it next week, where the lead story is, car crash at 2 a.m. on the 5 freeway. And it's like, oh boy, nothing's going on. Not that we're hoping for disaster, but there's a saying in this business called, if it bleeds, it leads. And what that means is if there's an accident or if there's some disaster, whether it be political, environmental, even a traffic accident, it'll be the lead story. You mean why AM for talk radio?
Yeah, why use AM?
Why me personally?
No, I mean in general, why use AM?
Well, amplitude modulated radio has a bigger signal. First of all, I mean, you can hear my voice all the way up to Santa Barbara every day and out to Yuma. What's the radio station you listen to? Okay, so if you're an FM guy or gal, that signal won't go as far. So the reason they do AM radio is because it's got a huge signal. FM radio, FM stands for frequency modulated, AM stands for amplitude modulated, I think. But long story short is they use AM because it reaches a bigger frequency. And typically on AM dial, you're going to hear sports, news talk, that type of thing, which reaches sort of a bigger audience. Because again, I would argue that if the whole city lost power like it did in 2011, or there was a terrorist threat, you'd probably turn on AM radio, listen to news radio, versus even if you're a non-radio guy, because where else are you going to get your information? So that's we reach the biggest footprint on AM. That's why they use AM radio. You would think that satellite radio would be the smart way to go, but then it requires a satellite receiver to do so. AM radio really takes a transistor and a coat hanger and a speaker, and you got a radio. Any other smart ideas? I'm only going to walk out of here with one deal. That's it. You have an investor in front of you, a guy who owns a television studio, a guy that can put you on television tomorrow. Nobody has any ideas? Okay, good. That's what I'm talking about. You got a question? Because of window of opportunity, and you're looking for opportunity now, right? That's good. Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Tell me what that is. I'll take it. Mm-hmm. You mean as far as getting the word out on food recalls? Sure. Yeah. So it's almost an alert app. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Exactly. See, I want you to think of it. And look, it doesn't always have to be apps. Although I have to tell you, that business is closing in on a $30 billion market size. That's a big market size. think in terms of this. Everything in investing and everything in business comes down to how much of the market can you capture. So if the market for Nike shoes, or let's say athletic shoes, is $10 billion, I don't know what that number is, I'm probably shooting low, and you want to start a shoe company, you want to say, look, I would like to capture 1% of that. That's a pretty big number, right? So when you're jumping after something, when you're thinking in terms of something, market size is a contributor as far as what we're looking at when we're putting deals together. Any interns in here that want to work in the TV business? We just lost our intern. Oh, there they go. All right. Well, I think you guys are resourceful. Clearly, the guy busted me on the music career over there. So if you have a little bit of information on me, you know how to get a hold of me to let me know that you're interested in internship. And here's one thing I don't do. I grew up in this town. I know a lot of people. I have a lot of friends. I have a lot of buddies who have kids your age that want to have their kids work for me. And what I won't do is answer an email from a friend saying, hey, my kid wants to work for you. It's got to come you got to do the ask. It's got to come from you. And what's worse is I'm probably going to give you to my general manager, and you got to do the ask a couple times. Because there's a philosophy in selling, and all you're doing here, by the way, is selling yourself or selling your deal or selling your app. And it's always be closing from the very beginning. You got to do this over and over again. It's not a one ask, oh, well, I'm done. So you're not selling Girl Scout cookies at the front door, okay? You're not selling sponsorships to the high school basketball wall. You got to be asking a lot, many times. Clear? Is that it? Well, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for strengthening our internship series and also for augmenting our entrepreneurial curriculum through Real World. You could come back. We're going to send you some interns.
Good.
We heard an invitation on the table.
Good. I like it. Thanks so much.